Hello everybody and welcome back inside the box for another episode of Gunpla Kit Bash with me, Kukumatsu. In this episode we'll be hand painting the metal parts, so let's jump right in. Alrighty, now that we have the panels all painted, it's time to do the metal parts. I am going to do this as a hand brush technique, but I'm going to start with the airbrush just to get it primed. And I'm going to do the exact same thing as with the panels. I'm going to use the Tamiya XF69 NATO Black. Okay, I have everything primed now, so time for the fun part. I'm going to be using Tamiya X10 gunmetal as the first color. The reason I want to do this by hand rather than in the airbrush is because when I've done it in the airbrush before, I get a very speckly metallic-y paint kind of result where all of the flecks of paint were pointed in different directions. And I don't want that. I want all the little flecks to be laying down so it looks more like metal rather than sparkly paint. There are definitely paints out there that do well in a airbrush and create a really nice metal effect. I haven't tried a lot of them, to be honest. Once I figured out my technique for this, I've just used it pretty consistently because I like the result a lot. I also kind of prefer not to put metal paints through my airbrush. A lot of people have a second airbrush just for metal paints because the little metallic flecks get kind of stuck in the airbrush and they're sometimes hard to clean out. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to get some paint on the brush, but then squeeze as much as I can off on the side of the jar. Not doing dry brushing, but just don't want to have a lot of paint on the brush. And then I'm just going to slowly drag it over the surface. Don't want any gloopy mess getting into the nooks and crannies. That's why I don't want a lot of paint on the brush. I don't want brush strokes either. It goes over the NATO Black primer really nicely. And even if you miss little spots here and there, because it's black in there, it still looks good. And of course a lot of this will be covered up by the panels, so you know, you could actually just do the spots that you know are going to be exposed. But I really enjoy this process and the look of it, so I just do the whole thing. I used to do this process after I had put the kit back together. I used to do just a lot of custom paint on Gunpla when I was first starting, and so I would do the whole thing. I'd paint all the parts separately, I'd assemble it all, and then I would apply this gunmetal paint directly to the raw inner frame plastic. It goes over the dark gray plastic, usually ABS, pretty well. And it, of course, is also an acrylic lacquer, just like the rest of the ones I'm using. So it has the same kind of adhesion quality that the NATO Black does, for example, or all of the Tamiya acrylic lacquer paints. The reason I did that was because then I only had to paint the parts that were shown, but also it was easier to pose because I wasn't painting anything that was then put together and had paint, you know, in all the cracks and everything like that. So it made it more difficult to move. Part of the reason why I'm doing this whole leg together is exactly for that reason, so that if I painted all these separately, then each piece would have a little bit more friction against the next piece beside it, and then it would be difficult to bend the legs. If you want to pose a lot after you paint something like this, you have to be really careful because you end up, you know, scratching the paint in the areas that you're moving. I tend to know approximately what my pose is going to be. I don't do anything really super dynamic. I like to do a fairly simple pose, and so I tend to just paint it sort of in that configuration with a little bit of movement possible, and then don't worry about it. I'm definitely not like reposing them all the time or anything like that. Once it's in the pose, it's basically going to be like that forever. So there you go. See, it's fairly simple, straightforward, easy methodology there. And I'm going to let that dry completely before going on to the next step. So I will go ahead and do the rest of the parts in the meantime. For the parts that already have panels attached, I'm going to do some careful hand brushing of the gunmetal just in the places that are metal. I'm not too worried about the fact that it's not black underneath. If some of the white is showing through, then I'll just do a second coat to make sure that I get a full coverage. Okay, the next step is going to be with this flat aluminum XF16, and this is going to be much more of a dry brush process. So I'm going to start off by getting lots of paint into the bristles of my brush. But then I want to remove as much as I can. I'm going to do that by wiping it on a paper towel. Do it till basically nothing else is coming off. Then I'll just gently drag it across the surface. And the idea is that it's going to hit the high points and nothing else, so it's going to accentuate them really nicely. Going for the steel look, kind of a more realistic steel look, hopefully. It's not meant to be like shiny metal, chrome metal, anything like that. This is really meant to be like raw steel with kind of the edges dinged so that they end up being shiny. I personally like a kind of realistic style, but still retaining the fantasy element. But still, you know, kind of grounded in reality, at least in its motivation. I guess that's partly because I also do weathering on my kits. So I'm not going for like a perfect shiny result, like showroom quality result. I'm always going for something that looks like it's been used and beat up and in active service, not just in the factory. That's looking pretty cool. Just compared to the one I didn't do yet, you can see that it just adds this nice little highlighty areas on all of the high edges, brings out the detail and gives it that slightly more steel look. Like the gunmetal color is a great color to begin with anyway, and this is just for me adding a little bit of extra oomph to that base color. There is another step that I don't always do on the metal parts, and that is a bit of weathering. I guess the reason behind that is because, you know, sometimes you can't really see it that much, or sometimes it's the end of the build and I don't feel like doing extra steps at that point. But and also I really like the look of this straight metal. But I'm going to do that step now. Basically what I'm using here is this Vallejo engine grime. I have here a bit of tap water and then the engine grime. And I'm just going to dip a little bit of water in there just to thin it out a little bit. And I'm going to apply it liberally over the surface. And then take a makeup sponge and remove the excess. And what I find is this just takes out that brand new look that it had before. It's a subtle effect, but engines and mechanical things that have been used for a while do tend to get a little dirty, even if they're being maintained and washed all the time. If I had gone and put in silvers and golds and all sorts of other different colors to differentiate all of the shapes in there, then this would be a nice unifying wash. You can kind of see the difference there. It's very subtle, but it just gives it that slightly aged, used look. And you can see why I don't always do it, because it's so subtle and because the things are maybe not showing. But I do like it as a final step, just to bring in that little bit of life. There we go. Slightly lived in look. If I go overboard with this layer, then I sometimes will go back and just do a little bit more dry brushing with the aluminum just to get those shiny edges back. But I don't think I need to do that in this case. There we go. I'm really liking that result. It still has the nice pings on the corners, but has a little bit of grime in there that makes it look like it's been used. Very happy with that. Well, that is the end of the episode. In the next episode, we'll be finishing up all the little details before final assembly. So if you enjoyed the video, I'd appreciate it if you give me a like down below. Check out the playlist for previous videos. Subscribe if you want to follow along, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.